In the core of the Persian Gulf, tensions spiked as an Iranian F-14 Tomcat made a risky move and turned its direction towards the US Navy fleet. The radar alarm blared with an emergency, altering the crew that they could be heading towards an explosive fight. With the distance between the jets closing in, the stakes are high, and the crew is holding their breath, knowing that one wrong move could set off a conflict in the world's most volatile region. While a head-on attack from Iran on the US Navy is a doubtful possibility, it's not impossible. With the military tensions at its peak, one such event could start a year-long conflict. But the question is, how will the US Navy respond to this unplanned attack? What will be their next move in this high-stakes situation? Let's find out. While an Iranian jet attack on a US Navy fleet is an unlikely situation right now, it does not warrant a safe future, especially given the complex history Iran and the US share regarding aerial and maritime interactions.
In confrontation on the high seas once again, U.S. officials telling CNN that the Navy fired 3 warning shots at an Iranian Revolutionary Guard patrol boat after it repeatedly harassed American vessels in the Persian Gulf.
During the Iran-Iraq War, the U.S. initiated Operation Earnest Will to protect Kuwaiti oil tankers from Iranian attacks. On July 3, 1987, the USS Stark, a U.S. Navy frigate, was struck by 2 Exocet missiles fired by an Iraqi aircraft, mistakenly targeting the ship. While there was no direct confrontation with an Iranian jet, the U.S. had learned its lesson and was very alert about such attacks. The tensions in the Gulf region were high, with both Irani and Iraqi forces active. Thus, the U.S. ships were called on high alert, and any aircraft approaching without proper identification was to be treated with extreme caution. Another incident that showed the complexity of Iran-US ties took place on January 6, 2007, when a group of Iranian speedboats, reportedly affiliated with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, approached several U.S. Navy ships, including the guided missile destroyer USS Hopper and the assault ship USS Anzio. The Iranian boats showed provocative behavior by closing in to within 200 yards of the U.S. vessels and performing a few aggressive stunts. They also issued threatening radio transmissions, warning that they would attack the American ships. In response, the U.S. Navy took defensive actions and prepared for a potential attack. Fortunately, the situation de-escalated without any physical confrontation or exchange of fire. The Iranian boats eventually withdrew, and no injuries or damage were reported. However, even if leading an attack towards the United States would have been advantageous for Iran, the country still wouldn't be able to do so, thanks to the laws and legislation surrounding the maritime interactions. The key legislation preventing an attack towards the U.S. is the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. This treaty, established to oversee maritime conduct, deals with the rights and responsibilities of vessels and aircraft in international waters and exclusive economic zones. The United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, or UNCLOS, promises the freedom of navigation and overflight in international waters, allowing aircrafts and ships to operate without unnecessary interference. However, it also requires respect for the territorial waters and airspace of other nations, which helps in forming lawful boundaries and minimizing the chances of accidental conflicts. What if the two armies have to come in contact? What laws will they be following? The answer is the Rules of Engagement, or ROE, which are critical and necessary guidelines for military responses. These rules, established by the military forces, dictate how armed forces should respond to potential threats or provocations. They ensure that any defensive actions are measured and legally justified. For example, if an Iranian jet approaches the US, the ROE would provide clear guidelines on whether and how to engage. This system is designed to prevent unnecessary escalation by ensuring that military responses are appropriate to the perceived threat and do not unnecessarily disturb the peace and stability of the region. Throughout this process, the one key element is maintaining a communication channel that is free of any obstructions. So, how does the US Navy maintain seamless communication with the opponent vehicle? This is done by following the International Air Traffic Control Protocols, which are a key element in avoiding international conflicts. Established by the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, these protocols include standardized procedures for communication and coordination between the aircrafts and air traffic control authorities. All countries, including the US, are needed to comply with these protocols to avoid misunderstandings and prevent accidental collisions, especially in regions with frequent military activity. By adhering to these procedures, both civilian and military aircraft can get through airspace safely and efficiently. Lastly, the military deconfliction mechanisms are essential in areas such as the Persian Gulf. These mechanisms include communication hotlines and established protocols for coordinating military activities to avoid accidental encounters. For example, once an Iranian jet is sighted near the fleet, the hotlines between military command centers will immediately activate to allow break-free communication and likely settle the matter without opening fires. However, despite the rigid rules, is it guaranteed that an Iranian jet will not cross paths with the US Navy? Probably not, which brings us to our next question. What will the US Navy do if an Iranian jet closes on it? You see, when an Iranian jet approaches the US Navy, a series of carefully defined procedures are followed to manage the situation while minimizing the risk of escalation. Firstly, the US Navy would use its advanced radar and surveillance systems to track the approaching aircraft. At this point, the Navy's primary goal is to check the jet's intent and decide whether it is merely passing by or on a sinister mission. Once detected, the Navy's command center would quickly initiate communication with the Iranian aircraft if possible. The crew will use established international communication frequencies to issue a standard identification challenge or warning, informing the jet's crew of its proximity to the US Navy vessels. The jet will be asked to immediately voice their intentions to avoid the situation from worsening. Simultaneously, the US Navy would deploy interceptors if necessary. These fighter jets will be launched to visually identify and map the route of the approaching aircraft and assess its behavior. The interceptors would perform different stunts to position themselves between the Iranian jet and the Navy fleet, making sure that the crew is in a position to respond however the situation demands. If the Iranian jet turns towards the US Navy, the situation will become more urgent. The interceptors would immediately move to shadow the jet, maintaining a close but safe distance. The Navy would issue repeated warnings, clearly stating that the jet needs to change their route. During this tense phase, the Navy's command center would also activate its alert status and prepare for potential defensive actions. Throughout this process, the Navy would coordinate with other relevant US military and defense agencies, including the Pentagon and the Department of Defense, to make sure of a unified and strategic response. If the situation worsens, the US Navy might have to activate the communication channels with the allied nations and international partners to seek necessary support. We would like to know, what do you think about Iran versus US maritime interaction? Is it possible? If yes, then what will be the consequences, and what impact will it have on both nations? Comment your thoughts and keep supporting the US Navy. Thank you.